by my friend Che Marville. Che is a businesswoman. She has run in politics before, and most importantly, she's an incredible, dynamic woman who wants to change the world and is doing so. And Che, I'm really grateful that you took the time today to chat with me.
Oh,
Um,
it's an honor to talk to you. And I mean, it's always lovely to talk to you, but especially right now.
Yeah, and one of the reasons I thought it would be really important to get your perspective, Shay, is because you, as a Black woman, have faced different challenges than myself as a white woman. Some of them are the same as, as a woman running in politics and some of these other ones. But as a Black woman, you face different challenges than Black men as well. And I thought it was important to get your perspective for a number of reasons, partly because I just so value your opinion too. So I'm just wondering if you could just talk a little bit about um, some of the unique challenges that you faced.
Well, number one, thank you for inviting me to have the conversation. I know that you're talking to lots of people and creating space for people to have conversations about racism and in particular anti-Black racism. Uh, number one, I should say that I always look at myself as a human being first. And that may sound Pollyanna or trite, but I think that's often forgotten in the conversation, that we are human beings, and what I see you as a human being, you see me as a human being, and we have to see ourselves in each other. And as a woman who is racialized, who has come from a working class family and has done some really, I've been able to do some really awesome things in my life, and I'm very grateful to do that, but it's not been without a struggle and adversity. And racism is one of those strange ones, because you don't quite always know where it's going to come from, and or who it's going to come from, and the why of it. It doesn't really ever make any sense. It's completely absurd. And obviously, with what's happening with our neighbors next door, they're going through a civil crisis, and we're not at the same level, but we also struggle with the same problems and the same systemic discrimination when it comes to Black, Brown, and Indigenous people. And for me, I would say that racism has been a ongoing thing in my life, and I can give you a list of examples of names that I've been called, and places that I have maybe been invited to, which is surprising here in Canada. But at the same time, I think what's disturbing is when I was running for political office, it was a bit different. It was never overt, and it's still not really overt. It's subtle. It's things like, maybe you shouldn't be running in Oakville because you could serve people who are more like yourself in Scarborough or in Regent Park. And my response was always, but I live here and Oakville is my home. I mean, you get events like that. You also, sometimes people just count you out. It's not just because of whatever party you're running for, but sometimes, I found that people would not take me as seriously as I wanted them to. And I mean, that could be for many reasons, but I think, race was a part of it. I think one of the things that was disturbing about being involved in politics is that sometimes race is denied as even something that is a part of the lexicon of our social identity. And so people are very polite about it. And the problem with that is that then you don't talk about some of the things that are affecting racialized people. And when you do bring those things up, you're thought to be maybe injecting a topic that is not relevant to the environment that you are actually operating in. And I think that's a kind of systemic racism, because the reality is that we all exist in the same system, but we aren't all treated fairly. And there are invisible barriers that some people see and some people don't see. And by having a diverse group of people participate in politics, you actually get different points of view, and you start to see through different lenses. You start to understand, oh, this is someone else's experience. It may not be mine, but it's theirs, and therefore it's relevant and it's real. So I think, you know, and the other thing is that because you have to, and no offense, because I know you are in politics full time, I think the political system right now is very business oriented and focused on, you know, marketing to certain demographics, and sometimes I think politicians move away from their role as advocates for people and for all sorts of people, not just the people who support you, not just the people who are the voters, not just for the people who give you money, but for really the people who have no voice. And that's why I mean, I've been involved in politics for, I don't know, 20 plus years or more, and it was always about working for people who didn't have a voice. It was never about winning. It was never about uh, trying to be number one. And I think because I didn't have that mentality and that hunger, it made me actually not a good political candidate.
I actually think you were a great political candidate. Um, I do, and it's something that has frustrated me, you know, especially living in the community that we live in. Our politicians and political institutions do not reflect the community that we live in, and the fact that you got comments like that, like "Why are you running in Oakville?" It sort of says a lot about who people think live in our community versus who actually is there. And I also think that when the ones you were talking about not having a voice don't see their voice represented, they're even less likely to come forward and get involved. And it doesn't necessarily even mean running for office. It means coming out to town halls. It means coming out to town council meetings when you're looking at what kind of play structure to put in a playground. And I know
Yeah.
that's not earth-shattering necessarily, except it is for the community that lives there. And so you're not getting that broad range of voices. And I don't know that there's always been a recognition that our community is diverse and we need to make sure that all those voices are heard.
Well, and I think it's also about people having a chance to participate and inviting people to participate and to participate differently. I think, you know, politicians, administrators, and legislators, I think we have to actually think about not just advocating when we are campaigning, but I think we have to think about our whole society and how the people who do not have a voice, how can they be served, but where can they be served? Sometimes coming to or going to a town hall isn't the way. There are different ways for us to meet, and although it's different now because of the pandemic, but there's different ways for us to congregate and to create communication and to be in relationship with one another. And I think, you know, even right now, as we talk about racism and as we talk about the really hard parts of racism, um, it's uncomfortable, and we have to be able to be uncomfortable together. We have to be able to listen to one another for understanding and see not race, but humanity. It is humanity that is sitting in front of us in every village, every town, every city, every province. It's humanity that we are serving. So when someone is hurt or abused by law enforcement, or some terrible event happens, it's not just happening to a Black family or a Black person or an Indigenous person or to the Indigenous community. It's actually happening to us. You know, and I think, you know, right now, one of the things that's happening is that so many people, I mean, this is such an interesting time because it's actually quite exciting in one way. It's quite hopeful. We have this window where we're all kind of looking at the same thing, or a lot of us in the same way and saying, this is not justice. This is not who we want to be. A lot of people are saying that. At the same time, at the very same time, we are also uncomfortable about having the conversations, and people are trying to find, what can I do? What can I do? Like, what can I do as a white person, that will, or a white woman, I use in quotes, to make things better. And I'm uncomfortable with that question, to be really frank with you. I want to know, what do you want to do as a human being who sees injustice? Do you see it? If you see it, then from your position, what do you think you can do in your own life? How are you raising your children? What are you teaching them? How do you behave as a teacher? Are you inclusive or exclusive? Do you have a point of view when you walk into the classroom about certain types of people or people who look a certain way? As a politician, are you waiting for the problem to come to you, or are you looking in all the places where you don't go and saying, who needs help? Who needs support? Which communities would benefit from having more entrepreneurs and banks and investing in their community? I think we have to be not just visually inclusive, but we need to be mentally inclusive and creative. And I think that we are in a time, especially where we live here in Oakville and in Canada, I think we are in a time, I think we have people of all backgrounds who are interested in that. And we need to figure out how to get those people at the table, helping to make decisions, and running for office or running ridings and helping campaigns. We need to get all those people involved.
Well, and I do think, though, a lot of times when people ask those questions, they genuinely are looking for advice, though, Shay. There are people
Yes.
who have never thought about race before, and
Yeah.
as Canadians, I would say we've been a bit smug, that we're not as bad as the States, which doesn't mean that we're good. It just means we're not as bad as there. And I think there's been some genuine questioning of, what can I do? Because I haven't actually thought of it before, and it's not
Yes.
right. It's not that they genuinely want to know what they can do to improve things here, because it's been a bit of an eye opener, I think.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think you probably agree with me. This isn't new, what's been happening. It's just being reported on right now. And
Yeah, I mean, and I think, well, it's not just that it's being reported on, because it's been reported on. I think
that's true.
that, because of our phone and because we have been in isolation, we see it in a way that we would not have seen it before. I mean, maybe also because we are all more vulnerable, because we're all going through this massive social experiment, right? Where we're not sure when it ends, and it's impacting people's psychological states. So maybe people are open, but I think it's also that people have relationships with diverse people. People are married and are in relationship with families where they think, I didn't even know this existed, and now I don't want this to happen to my child or my cousin or my my partner. I think that this is being driven by a new generation of people who, the older generation, sometimes we say, oh, they're so entitled, but they're so aware. They're actually calling bullocks to the fact that we say one thing, but we do another. And so there is this confluence of all these different groups of people coming together and saying one thing. And I think I'm not offended by the question, what should I do? I think that, some people, I think most people who ask that question are asking from a deep and genuine, place. I think what I'm thinking is, hey, the first time I was called the N-word, I was 4. Okay, that was, 44, 46 years ago. I'm a Canadian, right? The first time I experienced racism in school, I was 6. I was having trouble tying my shoelaces, and the teacher said to my mom, you know, she may have some sort of learning problem. And my mother said, well, what is how did you come to that conclusion? Did you test her? What, is she doing poorly in her, test? And the teacher said, well, you're new to the country, and and she's still, like all the other kids are tying their shoes, and she's still not able to do it, and she can't have someone doing it for her. And my mother said, you know this is what my mother said. I was born in an English speaking country, Guyana. That's my mom. She was born in an English speaking country, England. She went to nursery school there. She went to kindergarten there. She's going to school here in this country, okay? She speaks the language. She does her math. What does being able to tie her shoes have to do with whether she's slow or fast? Maybe she's just doesn't have that type of dexterity, right? And so, though there are things like that happen over and over again through your life, and you start to build up a resistance so that you can protect yourself and your kids. You try to tell them, this could happen. You hope it doesn't, but it could happen because it can come from anywhere. A few years ago, I was working on a project, and this is after running for political office and doing all sorts of things and being quite successful. And I wouldn't say that I'm a silly person. I'm pretty interesting, pretty smart person, I'd say. And I was working with someone, and they could not accept that we were working together. They questioned me on everything that I did, except when we would go to have lunch, and they would say, you know what, do you twerk? Do you twerk? Do you listen to Nicki Minaj? I love Nicki Minaj, and the rapper. Now listen, I don't have anything against Nicki Minaj. I think she's fantastic, but I don't twerk, and I don't listen to Nicki Minaj, and I don't have anything against her. But the assumption that the only thing that she had in common with me was talking about music and whether I could dance. I think I actually didn't, I just was offended by her desire not to have a conversation with me that was real. But it was when I was speaking to my husband, who is white. He said, yeah, sounds like she's got, some stereotypes, as she's working from stereotypes. And I think, and so back to the comment about, the question, I think that we also have to ask questions of ourselves. We can't just ask our friends. We have to say, not from a position of I'm wrong, but from a position of understanding. If I'm a human being and she's a human being, what's the difference between us? Would I accept being treated this way? Then what can I do in my own life, in my own work, that isn't just going to benefit people of color or marginalized people, but actually benefits me, because I get to live in a world where there's all sorts of people at the table, where there's all sorts of ways of entering a conversation. I think that's the thing that people miss about diversity, inclusion, and is it that, and I know those are not, some people, say diversity and inclusion don't go far enough. I think we all have to start wherever we are at. But when you start to think from a more pluralistic way, when you start to think that your answer is not the only answer, you are creating space for other people to enter, right? And that is essential.
So how do you see us moving forward, Che? I think we're at a moment in time. I think you're right. I too am hopeful, and if we don't start making some of these changes, systemic issues in our institutions, healthcare, education, policing. Um, Systemic racism exists in all of those.
Yes,
Um, we have an opportunity right now to actually make bold changes that
yes.
will have an impact. Where do you see us going, Shay?
So, I don't think it's one answer. And I think it is multifaceted. It is in terms of our legislation, it's in terms of our policy, it's in terms of the way we fund law enforcement, but also the way we fund healthcare, the way we fund our educational systems. Everything has to be looked at. And the great thing about this, because some people will say, oh yeah, everything has to be looked at, how do we even do that? Well, guess what? When you're asking, where do I start? You start where you're at. If you are in law enforcement, if you are working in healthcare, if you are a government official, or you are working in an ad agency, you have to start looking at the policies of your organization. You have to start looking at the content of your organization, not just who's at the table, because sometimes people hire diverse people, but the diverse people are not allowed to speak about the matters that actually impact diverse people, indigenous people, people of color, right? They're not allowed to talk about the things that are impacting transgendered people, right? And so if you have to start with where you are literally and ask the very question, is the organization that you are involved in, that you're working in, is it actually inclusive, right? And answer, that answer is something that I think that will lead to more change. I think also in terms of education, we have to educate all of our children in the value of our humanity, in our shared humanity. That and it's not just about not calling people names. It's not just the name that hurts a person, right? It's the behavior that follows that name, right? And so we have to start unpacking how we are treating one another, the stories that we are telling. I mean, this idea, and I'll just use this for example, that African American men or Black men are dangerous, right? This is a stereotype that is wholly untrue. And when we look at all of these events involving law enforcement, where Black men and Black women are treated poorly, when Indigenous men and Indigenous women, when their bodies are just thrown to the side and beaten up, or something happens to them and it's not properly investigated, that is not society saying that we are equal. That is society making excuses and saying, well, I don't know, they had a criminal record, I don't know. What does it matter what they were before you engaged with them? Policing should be noble work, for example. It should be some of the highest work that we do, so that when they're looking after other human beings, they are treating them with such care and dignity, right? So our training, I mean, I'm worried about law enforcement also. I don't know, I mean, I think I'm uncomfortable with the idea of saying, all law enforcement, or coloring them with the same paint, because there's a lot of law enforcement officers, administrators that are working hard and doing their best. However, in many ways, it's with blinders. It's with a certain amount of denial. And when I say I'm worried about law enforcement, one of the things that I think is not happening enough is training and discernment about people and actually caring. Training that is about caring, training that is about looking at the social determinants of health, training that is about looking at the psychological strains and behaviors that happen and that exhibit themselves when you encounter a person who's vulnerable and that is in trouble. Until that kind of training, I'm not talking about diversity training where you learn that it's not right to treat someone poorly because of their race. I'm talking about understanding the psychological mindsets of other human beings and starting to look at that, so that when you're looking at a human being, You're not just looking at what they look like on the outside. You're looking at their behavior. You're looking at the signs that they're exhibiting that are saying that they are under stress. So I think this, you're right. I think this is a moment of complete transformation if we are willing, and if we are willing to do it while we are uncomfortable. Are we willing to sit with people who make us uncomfortable, having uncomfortable conversations about things that impact all of us? And the last thing I would say is that, yes, I've been in politics. You know, I'm an entrepreneur, but before I was that, I was a researcher. I was a researcher at the Science Center for over 10 years, and I spent a good portion of that work doing research about bias, unconscious bias, about anti-racism training, and looking at the way, the relationship between bias and science. And some of the people I worked with, they were from all parts of the world. And we fought and we talked and we sat with each other and we cried. One of my best friends is my ex-boss, Julie McLaughlin. And he and I worked through so many things that have made our friendship rock solid. He's a white man, I'm a Black woman, right? We're not supposed to be friends, but we are. And it's not a pretend friendship. We've talked about all the hard things. And until people are willing to do that work, it's going to be hard to change.
Well, and you know what, Shay, that's just it. It is work. We can all say the right words, but if it's not backed up with hard work and effort, nothing will change. So, you know, we can say things, and I think the right words have been used for a very long time without things changing, and I think those words need to be backed up by action. I think that's a really, really good point.
And data, right? Like this
And
is
data, yeah.
this problem didn't happen overnight. And you know, I'd like to leave you with this thought. The thing that I feel hopeful about is that, yes, we are in the 21st century, but what we're doing is we're building for the 22nd century. We didn't get to this point overnight. It took centuries. And it's going to take time to unpack from the idea of domination and competition and who's on top and who's at the bottom. And we're going to have to move to a position of compassion, empathy, understanding. These are not words that you throw out. These are words that actually produce a behavior. Just like, you know, thinking in a certain way produces violence, thinking in a peaceful way, being mindful, being prayerful, being thoughtful, being respectful and compassionate, even to the people you disagree with, produces actions and thinking and experience that says we are better than this. And so I think if we can do that, and I think we can, and I think there's a lot of people who want to do that, I think we can get there.